At the core, the Future Force study is designed to help NATO and the Allies design forces that will be credible in future conflicts.
Hi, I'm Jackie Faye Burton, and welcome to the Transformation Brief, where we talk about how NATO is turning ideas into capabilities for the future fight. Today, we are going to look at one of the most ambitious efforts here at Allied Command Transformation. It's called the Future Force Study. It is an effort to take a look at what we're seeing in today's conflicts, combine that with foresight and analysis, and turn that into real testable options for how NATO's forces should look and operate in the future. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want to introduce you to today's guest, because Jack McGuinness's path to NATO is anything but predictable. He did start out in the UK military while he was at university, but instead of turning down that lane, he actually started teaching scuba diving in places like Fiji and the Maldives. From there, he moved to project management in places like Rwanda, the UAE, and Australia. But then he did turn back to defense during COVID and worked in the UK at the Ministry of Defense there. Fast forward to August 2025, he moved to the United States, where he works for the first time as a NATO civilian, working on this Future Force study. Jack, welcome to the Transformation Brief. That is quite the journey. So tell me, you've really embraced life here in the United States. I hear you do Tuesday night trivia.
Yes, thank you so much for that introduction. It's great to be here. It's been amazing to move here to the US. It's just such a different environment. I must admit, I'm enjoying the weather quite a lot and got a great project to work on.
Okay, so before we get into the Future Force study, from scuba diving to a career at NATO, how exactly does that happen?
It's not the most direct route, I'll admit. But for me, the common thread is it's always been about problem solving. So scuba diving was something really fun to do when you're young and start out, but you're always working with different people, working through different problems. From there, it was kind of a transition into project management. I had a fantastic opportunity working with lots of people, different people in lots of different countries. And it's all about understanding that complexity, breaking it down to something simple and trying to find out something that works.
Okay, so the Future Force study, what exactly are we looking at here?
So at the core, the Future Force study is designed to help NATO and the Allies design forces that will be credible in future conflicts. In the end, it delivers something we call force design options, which are essentially different ways to structure and employ forces based on evidence. These are options that are meant to inform our defence planning activities, our capability investments, how nations and allies prioritise their resources, and we do this kind of through that NATO structured process, the NATO defence planning process. So there we've got a way of bringing all the allies together in this.
Okay, so it's just about helping nations really realize what they need to fight wars in the future.
Exactly.
Okay, so pretty simple when you say it like that, but this is actually not really easy stuff. So when people hear future warfare, a lot of attention immediately obviously goes to Ukraine, but the study takes a slightly different approach, doesn't it?
Yeah, so we know that Ukraine showed us a huge amount of transformation and changes taking place. But Ukraine's in its own unique situation. So it's critical that we look at what's happening in Ukraine and take those and look at how that would impact NATO. There are circumstances that are the same, but there's a lot that's different. So it's not just about lifting and shifting, it's about doing that in-depth analysis, doing all our modeling and simulation and all the experimentation work that goes into it, so we can give the best results to the nations.
Okay, and I think the reason that this is important is, the Alliance has 1 billion citizens to protect, a lot of different conflicts that could potentially happen. So it's not like we're preparing just for one exact future fight. It could be a bunch of different scenarios.
Exactly, and this is what makes this so interesting. With the world situation right now, we know there's so much going on, but actually, if you would have asked many people 10 years ago, they would have given you a very different answer probably to what the world looks like today. We're trying to then, in 10 years' time, think what might work, but it's critical that we don't just narrow down ourselves to one potential outcome, that we look at a range of potential things that might be happening.
Okay, and so you're looking, though, at how conflicts are evolving today and then applying it to potential conflicts in the future. But how do you go from observation to something actually actionable?
So it's all about turning it, as you said, something tangible, something that is actually useful for the nations that can help them. And so we start by looking at all the intelligence and information that's out there. As our strategic foresight analysis we do here in ACT, and all our credible sources from around NATO and from the allies themselves. And then we translate that into testable hypotheses that we can actually run through a series of war games. We can take that and put in some very sophisticated computer modeling and simulation tools. And then we can actually take that again and run real world experiments on that to see if everything lines up. Because some things, as we know, work in theory but don't work in practice. So that's kind of what force design is trying to do. It's trying to take that hypothesis and then turn it into something tangible.
Okay, sounds really fancy and a little complex, but what trends are we looking at exactly in the study right now?
So some of the big trends will be things people are already familiar with. We're seeing a huge amount of uncrewed systems come in. We're seeing the rise of AI, and we're seeing new communications networks pop up. People experience them every day on their phones and through satellite communications. The real art in the Future Force study is actually turning that into real hard numbers. It's all well and good saying, oh, we need more robots, we need this, we need that. What do they need to be able to do, and how many do you need? And so that's where Future Force study really comes in.
Okay, and the trends that we're seeing are kind of interlinked to each other.
Exactly. We look and you can see that obviously with robots, you're going to need communications to be able to work with them. Artificial intelligence is going to see a huge thing. So it's just a big web of interconnected technologies, and you've got to work out how all those pieces fit together.
Okay, so what do these trends then mean to the future force?
So it's all about how we prioritize when we're thinking about our future force. We know we can't do everything. And so when we look at it, we've got to try and find those things that are going to make the biggest difference to NATO. We've got to try and find those levers that we can push that are going to really transform how NATO operates, fights, and deters the enemies through the 2030s. So that's what it means to NATO. It's not about throwing the kitchen sink at it. It's about dialing in on those specific investments that we can make that'll have the biggest effect.
Okay, so how does this all connect to NATO's broader plan?
So the outputs from it feed into NATO's 4-year defence planning process to help inform the political guidance, the capability requirements, and the future targets. So it's about linking that long-term thinking into planning decisions.
Okay, and so wrapping this all up, very interesting stuff. What is the real take-home value of the Future Force study?
It's about building a force that remains credible under pressure. It's a force that can operate when communications might be disrupted, when the environment's uncertain, and when we've got to adapt in real time. The study is designed to give NATO options that have been tested and challenged, so decisions aren't based on assumptions or guesswork, they're based on real evidence.
All right, you've come a long way from scuba diving in Fiji. Thank you so much for your time, Jack, and that's all for this episode of the Transformation Brief. Thanks for listening.